Welcome to Werezilla's Retrospective. I'm your host, Werezilla. And I suspect many of you have already checked out one of the most anticipated movies of the decade, Godzilla vs. Kong. You've probably spotted a lot of your favorite YouTubers reviewing the original King Kong vs. Godzilla in anticipation for its release, which I did a couple years ago. But while that's the most direct inspiration for Godzilla vs. Kong, it's hardly the only one. This movie makes allusions to all sorts of different Godzilla and King Kong movies, and we're going to be looking at some of them over the course of the next few videos, starting with today's topic, King Kong Escapes. So, how does this movie exist, you might ask? Well, when Toho made King Kong vs. Godzilla back in 1962, they got the rights to use Kong for about 5 years.
Yes. Kong's mine now.
Their first attempt at a Kong film was to team up with Rankin Bass to make Operation Robinson Crusoe, King Kong vs. Ebirah, where Kong would face off against a terrorist organization called the Red Bamboo on an island, fight a giant jumbo shrimp, and would have even included a cameo appearance by Mothra. If that sounds familiar, it's because Rankin Bass pulled the plug on this idea, and Toho eventually reworked this story into a Godzilla movie, Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. That's why that movie features a weird scene where Godzilla shows a very Kong-like interest in Kumi Mizuno's character. That's how little the original script was changed. Either way, their second attempt would involve loosely adapting an episode of the Rankin Bass's King Kong show. And yes, that exists too. I'd love to do a video on it, but the full series hasn't survived to this day, with some episodes of the cartoon having been lost. So, any review of the cartoon would literally be incomplete. But there's plenty to talk about in regards to this movie that actually was made. Let us begin. Unconnected to the events of King Kong vs. Godzilla, this movie sees Kong being targeted by a mad scientist seeking a dangerous radioactive substance called Element X, and wants Kong for the purposes of digging for this element. Because when I think of animals well known for digging, I think of gorillas. Although considering Kong is actually Plan B, Plan A being build a giant Kong robot to dig for the element, I think our movie's villain prefers to do things the dramatic way over the practical way. Now, you may have noticed I haven't actually said the name of the movie's villain yet, and that's because when I say it, I'm afraid you'll think I'm kidding. So I'll just play the clip.
Obtain Element X, Doctor Who, and you succeed.
Any similarities between actor Hideo Yamamoto and Peter Capaldi are purely coincidental. I make a Doctor Who reference, but frankly, this character gives the viewer plenty to work with. Not only would Yamamoto go on to play the Kamen Rider villain Dr. Shinigami a few years later, who was also a mad scientist that wore a Dracula cape, but we've actually seen him before on Werezilla's Retrospective. All the way back in year 1 when I reviewed Godzilla's Revenge. He was the creepy toy maker. Unfortunately. But it doesn't end there. Recognize his English dubber?
That robot is extraordinary. The real Kong couldn't do what it can.
That's Paul Frees, the voice of Ludwig von Drake. But it doesn't end there. The German dubs for many kaiju films of this time added Frankenstein's name to the titles of their releases. These would be limited to just the titles most of the time, this movie in particular being renamed King Kong vs. Frankenstein's Son. But in this version of the movie, Doctor Who is renamed, what else, Frankenstein. So really, if you want me to make reference to another character, Doctor Who is only the tip of the iceberg. And since we're talking about familiar faces, Doctor Who's benefactor in this movie is one Madame Piranha, played by familiar actress Mia Hama, who we've seen before in King Kong vs. Godzilla. Non-kaiju fans have likely seen her in the James Bond movie You Only Live Twice. Madame Piranha, or Madame X as she's called in the English dub, is a weird character. She says she represents a nameless fictional country that hires Who to get the element, and wants to keep a low profile about it in such a way that doesn't tie Who's actions to her country. Whatever that is. Of course, Doctor Who is a blatant supervillain that made a giant King Kong robot instead of doing something more sensible like using mining equipment to get the element. And then, of course, there's putting lives on the line when Kong and Mechani Kong battle in Tokyo during the climax. So much for not drawing attention to themselves. Theory crafting time. I said Piranha conveniently doesn't mention the name of her country, but given Mothra was slated to appear in the Robinson Crusoe script, maybe she's from Rolisica, the fictional country scene in Mothra's movie. One thing I can say for certain is that Piranha wears a different outfit in every single scene. It gets comical after a while, I'm not gonna lie, but I shouldn't really be surprised. None of us should. I mean, look at Kong's face. Look how buzzed he is. This movie isn't trying to be serious. The absurdity of the villains is half this movie's charm. A pity then our three human leads aren't as interesting, them being a trio of United Nations officers, Nelson, Susan, and Jiro.
I don't know. Do you really think we can locate Kong?
Sure, we'll find him. As long as they haven't taken him to the North Pole.
Jiro is of course played by Akira Takarada, a mainstay of the Showa Godzilla movies and Toho's kaiju films in general. Here he is at G-Fest a few years ago. Don't know who that guy he's standing next to is, though. This, of course, makes the actor more interesting than the character, as that's all I have to say about him. Nelson is also kinda just there, only standing out because he's one of the two American actors speaking English while the rest of the cast is speaking Japanese, with no language barrier present. And as for Susan...
Put me down, Kong! Put me down!
It's bad enough she's dubbed in both Japanese and English releases of this movie, bizarrely not by her actor Linda Miller, instead by actress Julie Bennett. It's distracting in the same way English actors being dubbed in a language they're already speaking in my Gamera reviews were distracting, but did Bennett have to give Susan such a childish way of speaking? Skipping ahead to 2021 for a moment, how sad is it that Kong's human companion in Godzilla vs. Kong, Gia, is a literal child and she acts more mature than Susan? In fact, you wanna know who Susan does remind me of? Dwan from the 1976 King Kong, a character that simultaneously behaved like a child while also being the film's primary source of sex appeal. Two things that absolutely do not belong in the same character. At least Susan leans only on the childish side. And the movie seems somewhat aware of this, as when the trio first arrive on Kong's Island, the men separate from Susan for a grand total of 1 minute before she's under attack. Keeps with the movie's tone. Now, while I call these three characters the leads, that's only in regards to them being the ones played by the top-billed actors. The real star of this movie is Kong. Now that we see Kong's aim was a lot worse in the 60s, let's get a good look at this new suit made for this movie. It's certainly better quality than the one from King Kong vs. Godzilla. It's got a silly face, but I'll take that over the falling apart suit from earlier. Of course, we haven't seen the last of the previous Kong suit as it's reused in certain shots, albeit now with a different, larger head that's not to the same proportions as the rest of the body. Oops. And who should be wearing this suit but none other than Haro Nakajima himself, best known for being Godzilla's original suit actor, and now here he is as Kong. Oh, who's Gorosaurus, you ask? This funny-looking dinosaur with a powerful kick. And he had rabies, apparently. That's the only part of this movie that's realistic. It's worth noting when this happens it's about 20 minutes in, so you don't have to wait long before this movie gives us some monster action. Gorosaurus forming at the mouth is a bit odd, though. It's out of place, but only because Eiji Tsuburaya worked on the effects for this movie. Naturally, his role in this movie resulted in some entertaining fights, but I am aware Tsuburaya disliked gore in his monster movies. And no, I don't know what makes the violence in Ultraman any different. Who knows? Though frankly, it seems nobody was paying attention to the blood in this film. At least nobody at the MPAA, as the English release of this movie is rated G. Don't get me wrong, it's not extreme enough for an R or a PG-13, the latter didn't even exist in the 60s, but it is very weird. I guess the MPAA are either more lenient on foreign films, or they put less time and effort into coming up with the rating. I mean, not only is this film rated G, but so is Godzilla vs. Gigan. That one definitely should be PG instead of G, but isn't for some reason.
You're a hard bitch.
Enough of these rating distractions, back to Kong. Another sign he's the protagonist of this movie? Kong ends up freeing himself after he's captured. That's right, Doctor Who brings him to the North Pole to dig for the element, hypnotizes into digging, only for the radiation to free Kong from Who's control. Then he eventually goes apeshit and breaks free. You could even say that... well, you saw the title. You'd expect, with Doctor Who having captured the human characters, that they would be the ones to free Kong, but nope. Kong frees himself and makes his way to Tokyo on his own. I guess that's part of the reason these characters aren't all that memorable. Kong doesn't need them to further the plot. In fact, Piranha helps out more than the heroes do, when she unplugs Mechani Kong during the fight, leading to the mechanical duplicate's defeat. I promise King Kong Escapes and Godzilla vs. Kong are not the same movie. They have a lot of things in common. Hey, wait a second. Where's that music coming from? Oh, I know what it is. It's Mechani Kong's theme, made by composer Akira Ifukube. Out of all the things I can say about this movie that's genuinely good, and not simply good for the genre, it would be the film's score. Mechani Kong's theme is probably the best thing about the character. No wonder Ifukube more or less reused it years later in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. Wait, that's the movie I intend to review next. I wish I could say that connection was intentional, but I was already planning on reviewing that movie next. I didn't know Mechani Kong's theme and the second Mechagodzilla's theme was the same until I did research for this video. Neat coincidence, though. In fact, before making said film, one of Toho's earlier ideas for the 1993 Godzilla film was to have Godzilla fight Mechani Kong. It all comes back to these two fighting each other's robot doppelganger, doesn't it? Overall, King Kong Escapes is a unique entry in Toho's monster movies of the Showa era, being the only one that stars an American monster. And by that same token, this is the only Japanese King Kong movie, making it stand out among the other Kong films. Well, the only surviving one, at least. The King Kong that appears in Edo and Wasei King Kong have been lost. But this movie is certainly something we won't be forgetting anytime soon. But that's not the only movie that inspired them, of course. Next time we'll be jumping to the Godzilla Heisei era and taking a look at another one of the film's greatest inspirations. I'm looking forward to this, and I honestly hope you are too.